Hello, and welcome to the Living Well Show, the program that strives to empower older adults to live life on their own terms. I am your host, Nicolette Hume, the Community Engagement Coordinator for the City of Lake Oswego Adult Community Center. Today on this show, we will be focusing on codependency, the signs, the root causes, and how to deal with it. As human beings, we have a deep desire to connect and depend on each other. However, dysfunction in families and the presence of various types of abuse and addiction can create an environment where codependency can take center stage. I would like to introduce to you today Connie Baker, who is a licensed professional counselor, a trauma recovery specialist, and the author of Traumatized by Religious Abuse. With her is her husband, J.R. Baker, who is an alcohol and drug counselor at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. Welcome you both to the show. And again, they are on our show before, but this dynamic duo is here together with us today. So hello.
Hi.
Hello, we're so happy to be here. We'll see how dynamic we are, but it's a duo.
Well, and before we begin, to talk about how you guys, began your journey to becoming, professional counselors, because this is something that you both decided on doing at a later time in life. So tell our viewers a little bit more about both of your guys' experience with that, or what led you to this point.
I got into it into being a therapist because my friends would tell me, why don't you get a degree and get paid for what you already do? So that was one of the reasons I read self-help books literally at 11 years old. So I was reading stuff on self-image. I've always had an intrigue with the human psyche. And then I went through some very traumatizing abuse in my mid 20s that really changed the texture of my life and me for the next 10 years specifically. And I decided I wanted to help the people who were going through some of the same things that I was going through or had gone through. And so, yes, in my late 30s, I went back to graduate school and graduated in my early 40s, and now I'm private practice.
All right. And what about you, JR?
Well, my journey is probably a little more on a winding road than Connie's was. I started out in the field of pastoral ministry and took a detour into medical work. I was a surgical technician for about 18 years. Went back into the pastoral field, and then we both moved to Portland. Um, well, 20 years ago in June.
Mm-hmm.
So we both came up here to get graduate degrees. And when I was finished with my work, um, I didn't really know what was coming next, but I got a call from a friend who worked at Portland Rescue Mission and said there was a position there. And that's how I got into the field of alcohol and drug recovery counseling. And that was in 2005. So I've been in the field for about 16 years. And I don't know, I guess I kind of got into it by uh, accident.
I was going to say accident. I don't know about that, but yes, yeah, it was a winding road for sure.
And the interesting thing is Con, you deal with people who are, dealing with some trauma in their lives, whether it's, big T trauma or little T trauma. And same with you, JR. And so I can definitely see how the both of you really balance each other in, on a topic like codependency, because you're seeing it at both ends of the spectrum. So, talking a little bit more about codependency, we're seeing it talked about more in the media, people admitting to it and dealing with themselves on social media as well. what are the signs of codependency? Because we're taught to depend on each other. It's a human need. So it almost feels like if you had a great attachment to someone, that some people may say, well, that dependency, or are we getting it wrong? What are the true signs and how would someone identify as such?
Do you want to give them your talk on spectrum?
Yes, yes. Let's talk about spectrum for a minute, because almost everything we do in life is on a spectrum. So all of us have a bit of codependency in us somewhere. There's just no getting around it. And I love how you framed this, Nicole, because healthy attachment, is an essential part of our happiness and our well-being. And we need to be attached to people in our lives. That is central. And that attachment can start to become destructive and painful and hurtful. And sometimes, I mean, there's subtleties with my husband. I've worked on codependence my whole life. I always say a good therapist is a recovering codependent. You got to have the codependent part to be tuned in and aware, and that's a good thing. And the recovering part to know where your boundaries are. So it's on a spectrum. I get codependent with my husband sometimes. You know, he comes home grumpy, and inside of me, I'm like, oh dear, I need to make sure he's doing okay. And the older I get, the less I'm like that. The more I'm like, not that, honey, you would ever come home grumpy. I know that, but if he did, I let him just be grumpy. It's okay. Whereas before in me, I would jump and try to fix him. That's that codependent part of me. On a real subtle level. So this is all on a spectrum.
There are some associated terms also. There's such a thing as a dependent personality disorder. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because that's kind of on the far end of that spectrum.
Yes, there's overlap, but they're not quite the same.
Yeah.
Dependent personality disorder is a bit different than codependence.
Correct.
A dependent person just needs somebody.
Yeah.
They hate being alone. Whereas sometimes a codependent person, well, I guess maybe this is the time to talk about two types of codependence.
Sure.
So one type is more passive. When we were when we were preparing for this, nobody's going to listen to this who knows my dear husband's deceased mother. She was sweet as all get out, sweet, good woman, codependent to the hilt. And she was very passive. She would never get angry. She would just get even. You know, she would just quietly maneuver and manipulate stuff and passively kind of around the corner get her way. That is one type. That's actually a classic type of codependent, right? I mean, we see when we talk about codependence, we tend to think, oh, somebody who needs the relationship and acts a bit needy maybe, and who's always just saying, no, whatever you want, it's fine. Whatever you want. That's one type of codependent.
Right.
Yeah. We want to hit the other type?
Well, there are people who are more aggressively codependent, where they will just hunt people down and be relentless in terms of wanting to please them, wanting to make sure they're okay, wanting to facilitate their lives.
Overtly control them.
Right. Overtly controlling. Yeah. So, there are people who are codependent, there are people who are dependent, and people who are interdependent. So a healthy relationship is more of that interdependent dynamic where we count on each other to pull equal weight in the relationship, and even that slides back and forth.
Yeah. And there's another thing, Nicole, I found a nice workable definition for codependency. Can I read that for you?
Absolutely.
Okay. It says codependence is a circular relationship in which one person needs the other person, who in turn needs to be needed. The codependent person, known as the giver, that's a good definition. The giver feels worthless until they are needed by and making sacrifices for the taker. So there's a giver-taker, and one sign of a codependent is they feel infinitely righteous. because they're giving, giving, giving. I am just giving so much. I'm loving so well. I just give, give, give. But underneath it, this definition talks about they need to be needed for their own sense of self. And that is a real crucial part of codependence.
What about in relationships where someone, and I think women might, I'm generalizing here, but I think that sometimes women can feel this way where maybe by their partner they want to be needed, or need versus wanted. Like, does that kind of fall into that, or what could you say about that?
I think everyone wants to be wanted, and I think everyone has a certain aspect of their personality where they want to be needed too.
Mhm.
Um, so back to Connie's spectrum discussion. It's when it becomes kind of overbalanced or leaned on too hard, where a person basically really has a hard time functioning without being needed or wanted to the extent of actually controlling the relationship and sort of maneuvering the other individual in that relationship to kind of fill their needs in
Yeah.
that way.
Hmm. There's more, what I'm hearing is more manipulative back to that, as opposed to it being genuine, genuine desire. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the need to be needed. I think all of us need to be needed, and that's a good. That's actually can be. It is healthy to a point. I'm thinking about my hubby and I here. Just use it here. If I need to be needed so much that I come in and I organize his life and I take care of everything for him, and and that's the only way I have a sense of self, then we're fully into codependency. If I like being needed and I'll do kind things here and there because hey, he loves it and I like him to need me a little bit. Um, but if he doesn't need me, I'm still a whole person. I think that's a distinction that could be made here.
Mm, okay. And then,
Nicolette,
oh, go ahead,
remember?
JR.
Do you remember the book from a long time ago? It was "I'm Okay, You're Okay."
Yes.
Yeah.
Long time
So
ago.
yeah. So in a codependence world, that book title would be "I'm Okay if you're okay."
Mhm.
I'm not
Mm,
okay if you're not okay.
That's another huge mark of a codependent is I am is my life is contingent. My well-being is hooked up to your well-being. So if my husband again were to come home sad or grumpy,
Which
and
never happens.
which exactly we've made that perfectly clear, um, never happens. Um, then then okay, so he comes home a little tense, and I immediately, if I'm in my codependent place, I'm like, honey, what's wrong? What do you need? What can I do? Or the classic is when he used to come home and start doing the dishes if he was tense. And I, as a young wife, was like, no, 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 I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that. Total codependence. Now I sit there and I go, awesome, the dishes are getting done. Anyways, and so if I'm in a good place, I let him have a bad day. I'm like, honey, sorry to hear you're having a rough day. Anything I can do? No, it's just hard. Okay. And then I go back to my reading or whatever I'm doing and let him know I love him and move on with my life. Let him be grumpy. Let him be sad. Let him be afraid. Let him be anxious.
mhm,
His anxiety can punch my buttons sometimes where I go, ah, he's anxious. I got to get him unanxious. That's the codependent part. No, he's a grown man and I don't need to parent him. If he's feeling sad or anxious or angry or any variation of those negative emotions, that if in my codependent part, that can punch my buttons. But if I'm in a healthier spot, I say, oh, that's a bummer. He's sad. That's his sadness to take care of. Now, might I be supportive? Sure, but I'm not trying to fix. There's a distinction in codependence. You want to piggyback on that?
Well, I would just say that from the other person's point of view, if there's a codependent relationship going on, the other person feeds into that by beginning to make demands on the other person.
Yes.
You know, I would feel a lot better if you would blah, blah, blah.
Fix me,
Yeah,
manage my emotions for me.
right.
And that's where the addict part
Well,
comes in. The whole history of codependency has to do, it started with a person who was dependent on alcohol or drugs. And they said, what is this strange, consistent relationship we see with people who are intimately involved, either in the family or a romantic relationship, where these people will keep trying to fix the addict and feel responsible for their behavior. And that's where the whole idea of codependency first came from. So, in the worst sense of the word, I'm trying to get that person to stop their addiction somehow. I'm trying to manage them. And the other person, I think, very important here, what JR just said, they are also saying, yes, you manage my addiction. If you were nicer to me, if you weren't such a brat to me, I wouldn't drink so much. And so the codependent says, oh, crud, I need to be nicer. I need to not ever say anything mean or bratty, and they'll stop drinking. And there again, that sounds very simplistic, but there's all kinds of subtleties to that can get involved.
well, and you talked a little bit too about personality. Is there certain personality types that are definitely more prone to being a codependent versus, um, like, does there have to be addiction in the family for there to be a codependent person? Like, can you develop it without it?
Want me to take that?
Sure, go ahead.
I think we're all addicts in some ways. we all use dysfunctional ways of numbing, coping, to some degree or another. Some things hurt us worse than others. So I think a generalized, I'm going to say no. I think all of us have codependent tendencies in one of those two directions, those two types that we talked about. The more passive, manipulating. Oh, I'm super sweet. All I am is nice and kind and just giving to you. And then, or maybe toward the other, listen, you're not doing what you need to do. I need to take care of your life. So do what I say, and I'll manage that. I think all of us have one or two or both of tendencies somewhere on the spectrum. Do you think that's fair?
I do. I think that, as Connie said, I think that people, again, are on a spectrum of whatever addiction that they're dealing with. And you know, it would be a mistake, I think, to say that in the classical sense of an addiction, where somebody
Right.
is totally dependent on a drug or whatever. I look at it as, what things in my life am I not willing to cope with? You know, do I have some things such as an anger problem that I'm not willing to actually address? That becomes the point of attachment for a codependent.
Well, and you also talk about, people being sensitive who are codependent to their environment, to people's emotions. Um, and the new buzzword going around is the word empath, which some people see that as a type of, um, almost like an intuitive gift, so to speak. However, when I've heard certain descriptions of it, I almost wonder if that's rooted in the world of codependency because people who are codependent tend to be so sensitive to others and the environment around them. What do you think about that?
I think there are certainly people that are born um more likely to be empathic. It does not mean that there are no uh, people that what am I trying to say? Empathy can be learned. There are some people who are more have a tendency to that, And there are some people who really have to work hard at being more empathic. Um,
And empaths need to learn how to have boundaries internally. And that is where, people who, part of what I don't like about the buzzword is it's one of the things, well, it's just who I am. It's what I can't help it. I'm like, I deal with my, clients all the time when they say I'm an empath. I say, great, what do you want to do with that? Well, I don't think there's anything I can do. Yeah, there is. It's called developing internal boundaries, and it's called becoming, there's a real big overlap, I think, in codependence. And being an empath and being highly empathetic. Now, my husband and I earlier this morning were talking about where does this come from, and I think that's where being an empath or a codependent, there's a lot of times it comes from attachment issues, a fear in your family of origin, like a fear of abandonment or rejection. Can come from trauma where you've had to just be on high alert constantly to make sure you're safe. A family of origin addictions and abuse in the family, having it modeled for you. I mean, there's all kinds of ways psychologically that we become codependent or become extremely empathetic at a very young age, thus an empath. And this is part of saying, I'm going to learn boundaries and I'm going to learn how to shut the energy off around me and focus on my own energy and my own sense of being rather than a constant outward focus of emotional awareness.
Maybe it would be a good thing to separate what an empath is from somebody who is very sympathetic. The difference between sympathy and empathy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think, and they're going to chime in on this, but I think empath, well, there's discussion about what empathy really means. If you look up definitions on it, there's two ways to describe, first of all, empathy. Number one is to feel what the other person feels. That's what empaths are about. On my job, seeing anywhere from 5 to 8 clients a day, that it would kill me to be an empath. I cannot feel what all my clients are feeling. Plus, it's going to go through my own grid anyway. We never feel exactly what somebody else is feeling. But I define empathy as the ability to get in the other person's frame of reference and to let mine go, to let my frame of reference go, to hear their frame of reference, to hear their perspective, and to understand that is, I think, healthy, appropriate empathy. Now, my codependent empath self also feels other people's energy big time at points, but I have to learn how to manage that and not let it wipe me out, especially as a therapist, being exposed to trauma all day. And then sympathy, I think I would put it in the category of a little bit more, oh, you poor thing. Maybe on the negative side, maybe even pity. I don't know. How would you define some of those?
Yeah, I think you're right that empathy is entering into the feelings of another person. It's recognizing that what this person is going through must be incredibly difficult for them. Whereas I look at sympathy as I'm actually trying to absorb that person's feelings.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Absorb those feelings and lessen that person's emotional load. I don't think an empath is trying to lessen a person's load. They're trying to bear that load with them in terms of, hey, I see what you're going through is really, really difficult.
So see, Nicolette, we've sliced this all kinds of different ways. I've made a distinction in empathy. He's using sympathy. And so there's really no perfect definition for these things. I think I distinguish it for health and what ends up hurting us. An empath who feels all the energy of everybody they're around is gonna wipe out. It's too much. Mm-hmm. They're gonna withdraw, and so that's where good boundaries with that. The ability to hear, I may not feel anxious if my husband is anxious, but I can be empathetic in that I can enter his frame of reference. And I understand I've been anxious, I get anxiety, but his experience of anxiety is different than mine. And that's part of empathy, to say, what is their experience?
So, as we're talking about codependency and also attachment disorders, so like say if someone's highly anxious, and they have, a lot of anxiety in their intimate relationship, or there's a lot of trauma, it can almost feel kind of overwhelming to also have that added layer of someone being codependent. As a therapist, I can only imagine that that might be kind of hard to diagnose.
Codependence is not technically a diagnostic category. It used to be in the diagnostic manual, but they took it out because what we're talking about here, I love your point, Nicolette, because what we're talking about here is a very, very broad brushstroke idea that encompasses all kinds of things we're talking about. And so it's not even a diagnostic category anymore. We talk about it, it's more of a, what's the word? Uh, a pop culture sort of phrasing and a way to understand something when we use the term codependence. So, yeah, so there's a lot of different views on even what it is and how to define it. But yes, all these things, family of origin issues, and I don't know, as a therapist, I just always know stuff is multi layered. If people come in saying, I need to deal with anxiety, it's never just about anxiety. It's going to be about their family of origin. It's going to be about their current conditions in life. It's going to be about attachment. It's going to be about traumas they've experienced. And so you just kind of let that stuff unfold, at least from my end. Honey, any thought on that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I got a lot of thoughts. I think part of what comes to me is it goes back to what we said earlier, that everyone deals with some degree and some intensity, a varied intensity of codependency. And when that person actually begins to start exploring what's going on in their internal world, the people that come for help actually dictate the direction of where that help goes. And for some, it will be anxiety. For some, it will be their fear of abandonment. For some, it will be different addictive behaviors. And really, it's up to an individual where they're motivated to start work.
Where are the current pain points? That's usually where they're motivated to start work. And so, yeah, you just take what's hurting them right now and go with that.
Well, and for people who are listening to this, because again, this is such a, we're seeing this talked about more and more, and people are trying to think about their own lives. How does one identify if they are, in fact, in a codependent relationship, like an intimate relationship, or maybe even with their family as well?
Yes, or friends. It can be,
yes.
We can talk about the intimate relationship, but it can express itself in any, it can be friends. And the other issue is there's some people I'm not codependent with at all. I don't even have a leaning toward that. And there's other people I can tend to be super codependent with if I don't watch it. So it's not like that's a character trait for everything all the time. I think certain people bring out different parts of us.
Yep.
So, honey, why don't you talk about how do you know if you're in a codependent relationship?
Well, we already mentioned some of that. Is if my well-being and my emotional state is dependent upon another person, that's a good hint that there's some codependency involved in that. In other words, if I come home and my wife is sad or in pain or angry, again, my wife never gets angry, so that's
Yeah.
that's kind of a unknown area for me. I never have to deal with that. So
After 30
um,
years, never.
yeah, so uh, if I've had a great day and I come home and I'm feeling on top of the world, but I come in and all of a sudden all my positive energy just kind of floats off on a big black cloud, and all of a sudden I start feeling sad or fearful or angry or whatever. Um, that's something to look for. Um, how do I know if I'm in a codependent relationship? Um, do I need her to feel good before I can feel good?
Mhm.
Do I spend an inordinate amount of time, energy, and effort to make her happy? Because at that point, I'm not trying to make her happy as much as I'm trying to make me happy.
Yes.
I'm trying to lessen my discomfort by making her life work better.
Yeah, and I think a lot
Mm.
of times codependents, people who are codependent, again, I'm going to say they have a high righteousness meter in the sense of, oh, I'm just giving, I care about that other person's welfare. And that's why I'm trying to fix them. That's why I'm trying to do all these things to make them feel better because I care so much about them. Dig a little deeper. I'm anxious because they're mad. I'm anxious because they're sad. I'm anxious, whatever. And so I am actually trying to soothe them so I can be soothed. And I think that's where you got to dig a little bit deeper in your own motivation sometimes because so much of the time we codependents can go, I'm just a giver. I do everything for people because that's just how I'm built. And it's like the question is, why are you doing it? What is motivating? And I think another way you know you're in a codependent relationship if you're giving so much that it's costing your health physically, emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
mentally, spiritually. If you're giving, and the other thing is I always watch for my clients is if they say, am I giving too much? I say, are you resentful? And if they say, "Oh,
Oh.
no," then no, you're fine. Because most of us are happy to make big sacrifices for people we love. We're just talking about before the show about the newborn babies and the high cost that they're so demanding. But we give it and we give it happily, even though it just wipes us out, because we know that little baby needs it. It's legitimate. So if I do something and like if I do something for my husband and I'm giving and loving and he doesn't respond quite the way I want, I'm like, well, that's a bummer. Whatever. I did it because I love him. That is not giving too much. But if I give and he isn't grateful enough and I give more to get him to be grateful, now I'm in a super codependent loop and I'm going to get super resentful because I'm giving more than I want to give. And again, a lot of
Mm.
us have the capacity to give a whole lot happily. But if I'm sacrificing and I'm starting to get resentful because that other person isn't responding the way I want to, it's time for me to stop giving.
Right.
Yep, and that's easier said than done
Yes.
because it's such a deeply ingrained habit pattern, and really a habit pattern that's been born out of the success a person has had staying safe and
Yes.
staying protected by that giving.
Yes. Yes. They're going to feel like it's dangerous to stop giving that much.
Um,
Well, and out of, oh, go ahead, JR.
oh, I was just going to say earlier you asked uh, who who tends to be more codependent, men, women, whatever. Well, I think, and you can agree or disagree, but I think I am more prone to codependent behaviors and relationships than she is, because that's what was modeled for me in my family of origin. My mother was strongly codependent, passive aggressive, and one of the things that has been true for us over the years of being together is, and here's, is this a diagnostic thing? I don't know, but I know that it was something that has been true for us and me specifically is, um, not being able to voice an opinion
Mm.
or a preference. Let me give you an example. Honey, where do you want to go to lunch today? Oh, I don't care. Whatever you want to do. And a lot of times
Mhm.
that's absolutely true. And a lot of times what I really want is just an absolute grease-dripping bacon cheeseburger. But I don't want to say that.
Right. But the flip
Mm.
side of this, how my codependency expresses itself, is about year 6 or 7 in our marriage. I shouldn't even say this publicly because it's a little embarrassing now. But when we first got together, I just swooped in and took over and managed his life. And in the sense of, hey, honey, you need a doctor's appointment. Do you want me to make one for you? Sure, go ahead. All right. And I look at his schedule. I'd make his. I shouldn't be saying this on TV. I would make his doctor's appointments for him, all in the name of being helpful and kind.
Oh,
And
those were the days.
yeah, right, exactly, exactly. But you know what? You know what the funny thing is? 6, 7 years in, I started getting a little pissy about it. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing all this, doing and managing. And that fulfilled my need for control. I'm like, all right, I'll manage his schedule and mine. He's like, awesome. I don't like managing my schedule. You do it. So these are two ways. So I don't think he's more codependent than me. I think it's a different expression, again, of codependence, where I was doing all this stuff, swooping in, taking care of the home, the schedules. I got 2 kids with the package. So I was taking care of the kids and doing all this stuff. And he'd come home from work and kick back and have a great evening. And I was working and getting, just managing everybody. And it took me, I'm a slow learner, 6 to 7 years to go, this isn't working well for me. And, to finally go, this doesn't go well. And that was my codependent behavior. Then I was being needed. And I got a sense of control out of it. Whereas he has the passive way. Here's the thing. He'll say, no, I don't, honey, wherever you want to go, early in our marriage. And then all of a sudden I found out he really did want a big, fat, juicy cheeseburger. And I was mad. I'm like, I can't read your mind. You've got to say it. So we're good expressions of the two ways codependency can express itself.
I have to say,
Right.
I appreciate your honesty and you're willing to be vulnerable in that way because many relationships experience that. And I almost wonder if, talking about this a little bit more, if men may be more prone to this than women. This is just my assumption. Like those old adage of happy wife, happy life, or things of that nature, where someone is obviously having to, um, you know, accommodate someone else before themselves or not be true to themselves, or sometimes in marriage the woman and the relationship might be the only emotional outlet for the man, whereas women, we kind of spread that around, or have a tendency to. So I find that to be interesting. But what were you going to say, JR? I'm sorry for cutting you off there.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say one thing that Connie and I talk about all the time is that in every relationship we have a dance that we do with that other person, and we're continually training the other person how that dance goes, and the other person, as any good dance partner, uh, the other person becomes very used to how that dance goes.
Yeah.
So maybe you can take off on that and make some comment on that.
Well, I'm thinking about years 6 and 7 in our marriage. Man, I finally stepped back and said, I don't like this dance. It's hurting me. And we stepped on each other's toes for a couple years trying to figure that out and learn a new dance when we were super used to. The DNA of our relationship was he was going to be mellow and go along with the flow and be super adaptable, and I was going to take care of his life and take charge of everything, and it worked great until it didn't. And honestly, it didn't work great even for him. We joke about that. He's like, oh man, those were the days. But he wasn't fully showing up. And that eventually he was healthy enough for that not to feel good. And so The dance, yeah, I think when you're talking about couples or even in friendships, we have a dance with anybody anybody we're close to. We know the rhythm of how we relate, what we relate about, where where the tough spots are, and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the dance can be very codependent, and it works until it doesn't. And I think that's what needs to be brought back over and over again is there's parts of this that worked for me early on, parts that worked for him. He didn't have to voice an opinion and get told I didn't want that big juicy hamburger. That was hard for him. And so there was these, we were protecting ourselves in these ways until it starts hurting us. And then we start saying, oh, this doesn't feel so good.
And why is it, and you talked a little bit about this, Connie, why is it that you are able to be more codependent with some people versus others? What is that? Are you sensing their same level of need for that in another person, like subconsciously? What is it that differentiates between those types of relationships?
Well, it kind of depends on each individual situation. I think it has to do with, like in my case, my codependency was modeled for me in my family of origin because my father was dealing with an addiction issue of his own with alcohol. My mother was classically codependent in a passive aggressive sort of way. And so it becomes very easy for me to become codependent with somebody who has some of the personality traits and some of the behavior aspects that I saw in my father.
Yes.
So a lot of it has to do with history and background and areas of our own personal woundedness or neediness. I think that when we feel, now we don't feel it always, but when we have areas of brokenness or woundedness, we relate or we try to address it sometimes in a very dysfunctional way. And one of the easiest ways is through this area of codependency, because it has to do not with facilitation, but with control.
I think another area, another reason, my husband's is really clear. He gets with an authority figure like a dad or a boss, and that can happen. I think I go from the other side of needy people tend to hook me. Needy, when I was young, oh my goodness, I say I wore a sign on my back that said, if you are needy and dependent, please come talk to me, I'll take care of you. Well, that in my 30s started wiping me out, and I switched the sign, and I'm like, no, not available. But I can still get hooked with somebody who I feel like is expecting me to take care of them. And so that's another expression of codependence. That yeah, the type of people that might hook us. I think it's very dependent on the person and their background.
I do think that whatever traits or whatever tendencies we have towards codependency, those are activated by dysfunctional, unhealthy people.
Yeah.
And so when we're able to find and attach to healthier people, the likelihood is that we'll actually express less of that codependency.
Yeah. Right. A codependent personality attracts abusers, addicts, personality disorders, chronically needy, life-sucking people. So a codependent is going to attract some range of those. And if you've actually dealt with your codependence, you don't attract those as much, or you at least don't engage them in the same way. It just, you're going to, a healthy person, doesn't hook with them as quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes another.
Go ahead,
Well, I
JR.
was just going to say that becomes another good question to ask for a person who's trying to find out, hey, is codependency a problem for me? Take a look around at your circle of friends and the people that are taking most of your time and energy.
Mhm.
Are they really healthy people where there's a pretty good balance uh, in a reciprocal relationship, giving and taking, where being with that person is mutually nurturing for both parties? If those are the people who are in your circle of friends, it's probably a good bet that you're in a pretty good place of balance and health.
Right.
On the other hand, if you have a lot of people who are really, really needy, really, really addicted, um,
Or
they
very controlling of
very
you.
controlling,
Hmm.
yeah, it's a pretty strong possibility that you're attaching to them in a codependent way.
We've got parent transactional analysis shows us we've got a parent part, an adult part, and a child part. And codependence is basically hooking from the parent to the child or the child to the parent. Adult mutuality, where we both show up as fully who we are and bring that to the table and negotiate that is health. If most of your relationships are imbalanced in one way or another, that probably means you've got some pretty strong codependent tendencies. And yeah, and to look around, what is my relationship with my significant other, with my family, with my friends? What roles do I play? And how can I make that more mutual, adult to adult?
Well, and I will say, viewers, if you are curious more about transactional analysis, you can check out our very first episode with Connie, where she goes over that more in regards to creating boundaries in our life. But I think that that's a really, really great identifier, if you do learn what transactional analysis is, because you can certainly see that play out in your relationships if you are someone who tends to be on the more on the codependent spectrum. But, as we're, you know, getting closer to the end of our show, the one thing that I am wanting to know is, okay, so we've identified what codependency is, and let's say we recognize that this may be something that we have and aren't aware of. How do we break that cycle of codependency? Because from what I understand, it does tend to be generational. It's something that we've grown up in. And so how do you get to that place of health? How do you change the trajectory of your life now that you have this awareness?
I think I would answer your question with a question, and that is this something that's not working for you? Do you really feel
Mm.
like it's a problem, and do you want to address it? Do you want to get better?
Because we've got so many payoffs for being codependent. There are so many payoffs. It's a way that our brain tells us we're keeping safe. And so yeah, the first thing is to address that ambivalence that all of us recovering
Yeah.
codependents feel. I'd rather fix my husband and make him
Yeah.
happy so he's not anxious and so I feel better.
Mhm.
Yes, let's do that real quick. The problem is it just doesn't work over the long haul.
Right.
So part of it is internal,
Yeah.
if I'm hearing you right. Say, do I want to change this yet?
Yeah. Well, and I think what you were saying was there are a lot of payoffs, and for a lot of people, their lives are, for the most part, functioning pretty well. There's you know, it's not always comfortable, but hey, that's life. Life's not always comfortable. There are stressors. Everybody has stressors. There's some, spikes in emotional problems in the relationship. Well, yeah, everybody has those too.
Yeah.
So it really is that question in that relationship, or for a person in a relationship, does that person feel a strong enough level of pain and discomfort to say, you know what, I don't care what it costs me. I've got to deal with this
Yeah.
because any kind of pattern like this relationally is deeply, it's complicated and it's deeply rooted, and it's been there for a long, long time. And it's it's not an easy thing to change. It's gonna come with a cost.
Yeah.
And staying the same comes with a cost. Change comes with a cost as well. So it's where you want to invest your money and your effort.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think the next thing that you can do is the next thing, if you finally say, no, this is hurting me, kind of where I was at year 6, 7, this is so not working for me. We've got to revamp this. The next thing, I go back to 3 major identity questions with my clients all the time. And the question, who am I, can be answered in what do I want, what do I need, and how do I feel? This is where the codependent lets go of those in all kinds of ways. For my husband, he's not going to tell me, I want to go, I want to have a big juicy hamburger or cheeseburger, bacon cheese. What kind of was it? Never mind. But he's not going to tell me what he wants. He's not going to define it sometimes for himself. For me, it was not asking. I was worried about what does everybody else want. That was my righteous part. I'm taking care of the kids. I'm taking care of the righteous is in quotes here, of course, taking care of the husband and all that sort of stuff. Look at me, I'm such a giver. When actually I'm not checking in with what do I want? What do I need? How do I feel? And finally, after 6, 7 years, I was like, oh, I don't feel good. I don't want this. I need something different. And those 3 questions are super foundational for all of us in our identity development, but specifically for codependents to say, I got to nail this. And there is risk with answering those questions. They're hard. They're some of the hardest questions we ask and answer, because if we really say it, there's usually risk involved with what we want and need and feel.
Yeah. For the codependent, answering those questions actually is a threat to their core safety.
Yeah.
It's like, if I answer this, if I actually disclose who I am, what I want, what I need, will I be abandoned?
Right.
Because for a lot of people who deal with codependency, one of the issues is it's not safe for me to have an opinion.
Yeah.
It's not safe for me to have needs. And if I actually emerge as a person, will who I am, will what how I emerge, will that be acceptable to the people that I really want to love me and need me?
Yeah.
That's a scary.
It is. And it does sound like in some aspects that, codependency has such it sounds like a dirty word, because we're such a independent, natured culture. And the fact that you are in need of someone or desire that, or have a relationship like that, can just have such a negative connotation. But you're saying that, or if I'm hearing you correctly, it's okay to a point, correct? Am I hearing that
We
right?
all need people in our lives. We all need attachment. We all, that brain science is showing this over and over, that attachment and having people in our lives helps our own mental health stability and our physical health. The issue is when we start attaching to someone in a dance where we are just the giver, where we're putting our own identity aside. And the scary thing is to say, if I stand up and say, here's who I am I going to be able to keep this relationship? Is that a summary of what you were saying?
Yeah. Okay. Well, for the folks that I deal with, one of the key issues in dealing with their codependency is over the course of years or time in a relationship, they've disappeared. They have vanished, and they try to find their identity. They try to find themselves by numbing that pain. It hurts to be invisible.
Yeah.
There's deep resentment with it. There's a sense of who am I? I don't even know who I am. That hurts. I've got to shut that off.
Mhm.
And they also feel like in their addiction, they feel a certain confidence and a certain um, empowerment, as crazy as that might sound, a certain empowerment to be a certain person,
Yeah.
to have an identity that's really dictated by that addiction.
I mean, it's such a complicated subject to kind of go through alone, and there's certainly a lot of resources out there. Is there any that you would recommend for people who are wanting to know more about how to understand this for themselves?
Yes, you bet. Before we get to that, though, I want to say one more thing
Mhm.
about this. If you know you want to change, is that okay, Nicolette? To just move on with
Yeah.
that. There's a few basic things that are going to be hard. They're simple, but not easy for a codependent, and that is take small steps. Don't give as much. Don't put up with as much. Set boundaries, and then be ready to follow through. And expect it to be uncomfortable and even hurt sometimes when you're developing that muscle, that new skill of not being codependent, but being whole and staying in your own identity. It takes practice. So be gentle with yourself. So taking those small steps, being gentle, those are some things I work with my clients a lot because they just expect to snap their fingers. Oh, I'm a codependent. Now I know I'm going to change it. Good luck with that. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's a you've said it is a complicated thing, but there's a few things like not giving as much, not tolerating things that hurt you, putting up boundaries that you're willing to hold, and expecting it to just be uncomfortable and awkward and difficult internally and
Yeah.
externally for a while.
For a person who wants to change this aspect of how they relate to people, uh, one of the things I think that we were touching on is, okay, when I start doing these things in a healthier way, everything's going to be okay. People are going to respond to that. They're going to say, "Oh, finally, thank God you're showing up." And well, okay, maybe that might be. In some cases, it's going to be like, "No, no, no, no. This is not our dance.
Yes.
This is not what we do."
Yeah.
When I ask you, where do you want to eat? I don't really want to know where you want to eat.
Because I don't want the bacon cheeseburger.
I don't really like what you like to eat. I like what I want to eat. So there's going to be pushback.
Yeah.
Anytime you set a boundary with somebody that you haven't had that kind of interchange with before, they're going to challenge it, and they're not going to be very happy about it.
Especially with abuse or addictions.
Yes.
Big time. There's going to be really hard pushback.
Yep.
And that's where I would recommend, you were asking resources, Al-Anon groups, some great recovery groups.
Yep.
Nose around for some religious organizations have recovery groups, and then you've got your basic Al-Anon, great for codependency. And then get professional help if you're thinking, I don't even know how to start this, or I've tried it and I can't figure it out. I think there's all kinds of books. The book Codependent No More, a classic from 30 years ago or more. I don't even.
Codependent No More.
Yeah, Melody Beatty.
Beatty.
And so that's a great foundational book to understand. And oh my goodness, if you search podcast codependency, I'm sure you're going to come up with all kinds of stuff. So there's all kinds of resources out there.
Yep.
What do you think about Codependent Anonymous or Codependents Anonymous? What do you think about that group in relation to Al-Anon? Is there a preference there?
I don't know enough about either of them to.
I think it's kind of trial and error.
Yes.
Nicole, I think whatever fits for a person and is most beneficial. Let's say that there are 10 different Al-Anon groups to go to. Each one of those is going to be differently depending on how they're facilitated.
Yeah.
And a person needs to kind of try it on to see if it fits.
Groups are always like, groups are always like that. You've got to go to one that yeah, like whether it be AA or whatever recovery group. Yeah, so I don't think there's a big, my hunch, like most things, there's a spectrum of more helpful to less helpful in both of those categories.
Yeah, the saying in the recovery world is if you haven't found a good meeting to go to, try another meeting.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's just keep trying until you find one that clicks for you.
right.
Well, I thank you both for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. As we know, during the pandemic, the therapist world has been inundated with the people. So I really appreciate you both coming on the show today.
It was fun.
Happy to be here. We love it. Very fun to be able to talk about stuff like this.
And as you've learned today, codependency is something that many people deal with, and we certainly now have the resources to think about this a little bit more deeper. And I hope that you're able to use this information in a way that is helpful to you in your life. And for some people, you are able to break free from. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Nicolette Hume. I hope that you've enjoyed this program, and I can't wait to see you next time. And until then, be kind, be safe, and always stay curious. Take care.